why that is, what the goal is, and what they're doing with those lands?
Thanks for the question, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to try really hard to stay in the unclassified realm here, but it's a comprehensive strategic plan that goes back about a decade to the CCP's plans and intentions, when it incorporates multifaceted intelligence apparatus, both the MSS and the PLA. And it starts what I would call and phrase outside the fence line of DoD facilities. That began with the Huawei cell tower capabilities, tracking and being able to monitor not only troop movements, but weapon silos and other areas. The strategic purchases of businesses outside of not only military bases, but military residential areas. The influence of the Chinese being able to do software and malware manipulation penetration on electrical grids and power stations outside of the military bases. I think the next aspect is exactly what you referenced, right? What is the next thing that the Communist Party of China, and Russia for that matter, are looking to exploit outside the fence line of U.S. military bases? That includes land purchases. And I think when you look at all the land that not only the Chinese Communist Party and their proxies have purchased, you're going to find a strategic military base and or subterrestrial things in the ground, as well as energy issues to the military base. And also we look at the balloon we just saw, very similar trajectory to those areas. So it's a comprehensive strategic plan that you see from the Communist Party.
Do you think there was coordination between staying in the unclassified? I mean, the lands that the balloon flew over, purchases that we've seen, I mean, could there be coordination either now or in the future?
Absolutely. There's nothing done by the Communist Party of China that does not have strategic entity or coordination. I think we'll see in the future, if it's declassified, what some of the things the balloon was surveilling and or potentially doing more surveillance too.
Thank you. General Costello, thanks for the testimony. And, you know, the threats that you mentioned that you're very worried about and concerned about, what keeps you up at night on the air power threats? And what needs to happen resource-wise, specifically here, NORAD, NORTHCOM, in order to identify, deter, detect, and defeat?
Thank you, Chairman. What keeps me up at night is the age and the capabilities of our existing air and space forces. For 20 years, we've been engaged in a very land-centric campaigns in the Middle East. We've been doing counterinsurgency, counter-violent extremists, counterterrorism, all important for our nation. But during that 20 years, we did not invest in air and space forces to the extent we needed to. So we're left with that old fleet that I described before. A 30-year-old fighter can do fine providing close air support in Iraq or Afghanistan against a low-end threat, but it's not going to survive very well and it's not going to survive in the China fight. And but more so, it doesn't deter China. And so we have to realize the investment that's needed in the air and space domain has been neglected, and we have to get after it for the exact reasons that's been described by our expert panelists on China. And that's what keeps me up at night.
When you look at the threats that are being posed, hypersonics, the ranges that are increasing, the ability to reach out and touch us, how important is NORAD, the Joint Air Power Enterprise, to the defense of our homeland?
NORAD, the National Defense Strategy, 2 of them now in a row have said that homeland defense is the #1 priority. Problem is we haven't resourced it to that extent that our words say. And the commanders of NORAD have asked for modernization of radars for years now and had not gotten it. And that would have helped us detect those balloons sooner. And then the aging fighters. Almost every major metropolitan city in America is defended by our Air National Guard fighters that are getting older and older. They don't have the capabilities, the radars that they need, not only for the balloons, but the radars they need for the real threat, which would be a cruise missile attack against our homeland. And so that's what concerns me.
Thank you. My time has expired. I yield back and now recognize the ranking member.
Thank you, Chairman. It is clear that the Chinese Communist Party is taking a whole-of-government approach to advancing its ambitions at the expense of U.S. and democratic interests, and therefore we must take a whole-of-government approach to meeting that threat. So that covers Homeland Security, Defense, Commerce, State Department, etc. So I'm going to focus on the Homeland realm. Dr. Jose, can you expand on the methods that the CCP is using to influence public opinion, both here at home in the U.S. and globally, and what more we could be doing to measure their efforts and to mitigate their success?
Sure. Thank you very much for the question. The bulk to date of China's influence operations, both in the United States and abroad, are focused on what you might say are winning friends and influencing people, right? This is coming directly from Xi Jinping, who has directed the party's apparatus that has deep roots in propaganda to leverage those capabilities in order to tell China's story well to the world. It is interesting to think about the ways in which China's institutions domestically are sort of naturally positioned to make that transition from a domestic-based propaganda machine to an international one. If one thinks from the perspective of the Chinese Communist Party, from their perspective, domestic propaganda has worked thus far in keeping the CCP in power. Those capabilities and organizations exist, and it is easy to see how they would assume that those same types of propaganda would work in foreign audiences. To date, however, as I emphasized in my written testimony, we don't necessarily have the best evidence to judge whether or not these propaganda efforts outside of Chinese borders have been effective. As I mentioned in the opening statement, we do know that global public opinion towards China, particularly in the United States and the countries with whom we share closest interests, has declined substantially in the past few years, which would actually suggest that from a certain perspective, the propaganda doesn't necessarily work as well as the CCP would hope. That being said, there's a multitude of things that are confounding that relationship, of course, right? The fact that there has been a global pandemic, the fact that it could be working in certain areas and not others, certain framings that the Chinese Communist Party and its diplomats use are more effective than others. And it's one of the reasons why I think there needs to be more research on this matter and something the U.S. government can certainly help with.
Thank you. Mr. Evanina, in your written testimony on the threat of corporate espionage and the theft of intellectual property, you recommended the creation of an economic threat intelligence agency to assist U.S. companies in protecting themselves against corporate espionage. Can you expand on how that should be structured to be most effective if we were to do it?
Thank you, Ranking Member. I recommended an entity similar to the FS-ISAC that is specifically geared towards the economic awareness and understanding of IP and trade secret theft and emerging of not only the thought process, but the ideation, but also the laws that govern our patent processes and our IP theft around the world, and to mirror what the Communist Party are doing around the, and then educate our American businesses, their general counsels, the people that do law for them outside counsel, to understand what it looks like when you're about to be stolen and robbed for IP theft, and be able to provide that real-time actual intelligence from the intelligence community, DHS, and Commerce and Treasury to businesses who are not only at risk, but in the process, because once it happens, it's too late. The data's already gone. The government needs to be more forward-leaning and left of boom.
Thank you. I found that very interesting. And so, perhaps as a follow-up after this hearing, you can send us some recommendations in more detail about, where it should be housed, how it should be staffed, which agencies should be involved, because I think that's a very interesting recommendation.
Yes, sir.
And I yield back.
All right, the gentleman yields. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. D'Esposito.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all. So dozens of demonstrators protested outside of a building in New York City's Chinatown last month. The building, which is owned by the Changli Association, operates what they call a service station. And they're accused of operating a CCP police station that allegedly conducts surveillance and intimidates CCP descendants and activists. Like the recent incident with the Chinese surveillance balloon, this station could be the latest CCP action that violates U.S. sovereignty and poses a threat to national security. It's been reported that there's over 100 of these offices around the world. Mr. Evanina, please describe your concerns surrounding this potential CCP police station in terms of counterintelligence threats and the safety of Americans.
Thank you, Congressman. I think when you look at that specific issue in New York City and the subsequent search by the Department of Justice and FBI, which is a high threshold to obtain, it's a manifestation of the strategic plan of the Communist Party of China to not only influence, manipulate their own diaspora here in the United States, but provide an intimidation factor. And I would say that this issue in New York and the search of that domestic police station is in partnership with their Operation Fox Hunt that my colleague, Ms. Bickham, talked about, which is an international program, but very, very aggressive in the United States to surveil and try to rendition Chinese diaspora here who were anti-Xi and regime. And they've been very successful at it. And the fact that this happens on our American soil, to me, is unacceptable.
I agree. So it's been reported that there's over 100 throughout the world. Do we know how many are actually on U.S. soil?
I do not, but I'm pretty confident our law enforcement, both at the state, local, and federal level, are pretty aware of that.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize my good friend, the gentleman from California, Mr. Correa.
Mr. Chairman from Texas, thank you very much. I've been sitting in this committee for a number of years. Cyber, big issue, continues to be a big issue. A number of testimonies ago, we heard that Russians have essentially penetrated most of our infrastructure, just like we've penetrated most of their infrastructure. So we have a standoff, so to speak. Action by either side is too expensive, so to speak, in terms of the damage. Now we have a situation internationally, a geopolitical realignment where Russia and China are beginning to work much more collaboratively. My question, common thought, first of all, Mr. Ivania, how do you see this, given that our foreign minister, China's foreign minister recently said, essentially warned us of conflict and confrontation in the United States? How do you see this evolution in terms of multiplier effect of a threat on the United States? Russia and China working together, how real is that? And what's the potential for the future of continued collaboration to really challenge the United States in ways we have not envisioned in the past? Thank you.
Mr. Congressman, I concur with your statement, and I think it is a very concerning issue when two nation states who don't like each other are merging against one common enemy, the United States. Geopolitically, diplomatically...
So you're saying that enemy of an enemy is my friend? Is that the situation?
I was going to say that, but it was a little bit better you said it. But yes, correct. And I think when you look at, I'll stick in my lane here, you mentioned the Russians' penetration to our systems, both IT and OT, SCADA, ICS systems here in the United States, probably predates the Communist Party of China, but I'm pretty confident the Communist Party of China has either duplicated those penetrations or ridden along those. And I think the sharing of the intelligence services between Vladimir Putin and Russia and the Communist Party is probably the most problematic for me as what they see, because that's the most invisible part of that threat.
I think that right now we still have an edge when it comes to cyber, 2 or 3 years maybe. So I often think of defense, a good offense is the best defense you can have. So if I may, what would you recommend moving forward would be the best way to counter these unprecedented challenges that our country has?
Congressman, I think you make a good point, and it's probably important that reiterate the fact that as much as what you're hearing here is depressing, demoralizing, and it's a legitimate threat to our nation, we must pause and remember that we have the most amazing military and intelligence and law enforcement capabilities the world has ever seen. The women and men of DOD and the intelligence community are phenomenal. Our capabilities are second to none in cyber, military apparatus, and intelligence. So Americans should go to sleep at night, be thankful for the fact that offensively, we've never seen anything better than we can do. Unfortunately, it's not public.
Today.
Yes, sir.
Please continue. Didn't mean to interrupt you. Anybody else have comments, thoughts on my questions? Ma'am?
Congressman, if I might build off of that on cyber, when I look at the homeland, so much of our commerce and activity rides on commercial infrastructure. And building off of Mr. Evanina's point earlier, it's very important that the government figure out how to share threat intelligence information with the private sector, with those oil, gas, pipeline, energy, financial services sectors.
In real time.
In real time, and that's the key. And if you're a business, you hear this top level talk, but what's particularly valuable is figuring out a way to provide security read-ins to some of these business leaders, bring them into the tent, but also share specific techniques, procedures with them. It's one thing to hear about this general Chinese threat. It's another thing to hear the tactics that they're using to go after you. And then you realize, holy crap, that's what's been happening in my network. Now let me work with you to take some preventative measures.
30 seconds, anybody else? The chair, I yield. Thank you very much. Oh, please.
Just amplifying Ms. Begum, I would point to your question, sir, to the incredible success our intelligence and defense department has had with Ukraine and preventing Russian cyber capabilities, not only in Ukraine and Europe and here in the U.S. as a category for us being ahead of others in the cyberspace.
Thank you for ending on a good, positive note. Mr. Chair, I yield.
The gentleman yields. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Arizona, former Navy SEAL, Mr. Crane.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. Thank you, guys, for attending today. We appreciate it. You know, it's not often up here that, me and my colleagues on the other side of the aisle can agree upon something. So it is great to be in agreement on the threat that China is. Obviously, the American people are watching, and they're very concerned when they see spy balloons flying over the United States, farmland being bought up near, farms, fentanyl coming across our southern border. We know, where the origin of a lot of that comes from, theft of intellectual property, covering up the origins of COVID, Chinese police stations in some of our cities. My first question is for you, Mr. Evanina. Did I pronounce that correctly? Sir, do you know what elite capture is?
Yes, sir.
Can you, for the panel and for maybe some of those watching, can you describe what elite capture is, please?
Congressman, I can. I would probably prefer to some of the more better informed experts here on that panel for that particular definition.
Okay. Is there anybody want to take a stab at it? Sir, am I correct that you are an expert in counterintelligence, right?
Yes, sir.
So can you just give me a really broad, doesn't have to be super specific, what is elite capture?
Yeah, I think when you look at it, the capabilities and intent of our adversaries and our ability to be proactive and make an affirmative effort to capture telecommunications to humans, to technology in or at the battlefield or in the gray space provides us the best venue or avenue for potential to win.
Okay. Can you give me some examples of how that's often done? How that's carried out?
Sure. Well, first of all, I would say a lot of it's done with authorities that are granted to both NSA and the FBI overseas. Section 702, our abilities to capture telecommunications conversations to foreign adversaries, both the foreign born, but are also overseas. That gives us leads and intentions of nefarious activities, both terrorism and counterintelligence, espionage, of those actors overseas that are, as Ms. Bingham said, riding on commercial capabilities that are around the world. And that capability allows the U.S. to be able to pre-identify and do threat and warning to actors here in the U.S., both from a systems, data, and people perspective.
Would you say that it's accurate that foreign states and actors often try and compromise and corrupt leaders and officials within our own government? Would you say that that's a form of elite capture?
I would, and it's done quite regularly for decades.
Would you say that it's often true that family members are often used in these types of efforts to corrupt foreign leaders, officials?
Congressman, for the past decade, I've spent my time in 3 different organizations advising and informing Americans, members of Congress, about the threat to them as a person, and it always starts with family members and utilization of mobile telephones.
Thank you. Sir, are you also aware of some of the reported business dealings of Hunter Biden with individuals linked to the Chinese Communist Party?
Only what I've seen in public reporting, sir.
What did you think of the reporting that you read, sir?
I'm not sure I could actually opine of what I've read in public reporting, but I could say that the TTPs of which foreign entities are utilized against Americans and family members is tried and true and very predictable and reportable.
Let me ask you a follow-on to that, sir. Did you find the reports, whether you believe them or not, did you find those reports concerning? Just with all of your knowledge in this space and how you've seen this type of thing play out in the past?
Yes, sir. I think when you look at what's been reported publicly about the potential tactics and techniques that were displayed publicly about the potential for penetration to a family member of the United States president is something that most intelligence services try to do regularly.
Thank you.